everybody, and welcome to the media show on the Pod TV network. And we're going to be discussing, of course, American politics. And with that, we're going to bring in, which makes the media go round, especially talk shows. And we're bringing the former writer for Jimmy Kimmel Live from Southern California, Rick Rosner. Welcome to the show. You'll have something to say, I'm sure, about politics, since I think you talk about it every week. Now we'll go to Northern California, and a person who is apolitical himself, the author of Chess for Dummies, Jim Eade. You'll have something to say, I hope, about American politics. And then we will go further north, if you can imagine that, to the beautiful land of Canada and bring in Sasha Starr about American politics. Maybe we should talk about Canadian politics, but you guys aren't as exciting as we are here. And then in the great United States of America, we'll also bring in Jatovi McDuffie from the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill area. And then finally, well, he's not here yet, we'll bring in our Australian mate, Shaquille Latmer, as soon as he's done making his trades. So, Rick, what are your thoughts about American politics in the media? Is this one of our biggest games for talk shows? Because we're thinking about starting a show that's just going to be on American politics. What are your thoughts, Rick?
Well, for the past two elections and probably longer, the media has been accused of making elections a horse race where they aren't. And it's shaping up to be like that again, though 2016 turned out to be a horse race in that the dark horse won. And we're 6 months away from the first primary. We're less than 15 months away from the election. This week, Trump will be indicted for more racketeering and election fraud in Georgia. And polls are a mess. It used to be you could rely on polls to have some clue of the landscape. But now fewer than one person in 500 will say yes to being surveyed because nobody likes getting cold calls anymore. And that means when only one person in 500 is responding, that person is probably a lunatic. So we don't know really where we stand. Trump is at his highest net disapproval since the first year of his presidency. Most Americans are pretty disgusted with him, but it's hard to get a handle on where we are, which the media like because then more people can be nervous and compulsively watch.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it seems to me that made for television talk shows is politics. I mean, you throw in politics and you always get people rapping and talking about it. And speaking of rapping and talking, Mark Lee, what are your thoughts about American politics since you have your 100 years experience in journalism? And I know you did a lot of radio before you came on Pod TV. Was that a hot?
Done radio, done newspapers, done a limited amount of television, but definitely have done a number of things in the media and all along those lines. And one of the important conversations that comes up even in media is, like I was saying, the nature of the political aspect, because definitely as a journalist and a trained journalist, we are taught to be subjective and all objective. And see, I did the word wrong, but objective and all along those lines. But definitely we have our natural subjectivity as well. So we do, as journalists, bring our own biases into what we do, whether we want to or not. And as a good journalist, you are trying to do as much as possible to curb those inclinations and all along those lines, because the nature of journalism is to be as objective as possible and not to jump on one side or the other, but to present the truth as it is given and all along those lines, and let the public make its decisions. And that is what I pride myself on doing, even here on Pod TV, is having people give different viewpoints and share their different viewpoints, whether I agree with them or not. In some cases, folks don't even know whether I agree with them or or not, because that's what I try to not let the people that I am talking to know as well, because I've definitely talked to people on both the conservative and the liberal sides and all in that space. I was going to bring up something just really quickly. I brought it up in the news and we didn't really get to it in the news, but one of the concerns that folks have is freedom of the press and freedom of journalism in general. And there was a law enforcement officers in Kansas that raided the home of a local newspaper and a journalist home there on this past Friday, and it definitely prompted a lot of outrage over what the First Amendment experts are calling a likely violation of federal law. So it was in the small town of Marion, Kansas, and they issued a search warrant signed by a county judge, and they grabbed everything from the computers to the cell phones to the reporting materials, meaning the notebooks and the pens and all of that stuff. And definitely a lot of folks are saying that they were investigating the newsroom for identity theft, which is a major problem in the world, and everything. And the raid was linked to alleged violations of a local restaurant owner's privacy when journalists obtained information about her driving record. So how much is too much information, and or do we need to be concerned about this raid that apparently violated federal law?
They killed the publisher's mom. The publisher's mom, who I think still worked at the paper, was 98, and the raid gave her a heart attack, which killed her.
Wow.
Oh, that pretty much hurts. But when I'm looking at the media, every time I listen to media, I feel I'm being manipulated, sometimes subliminally. On CBS the other day, they're talking about this vote in Ohio, which is to pass a constitutional amendment more than 50% or less. And they don't focus on that. They run to abortion. And they don't even focus on that. They then push off the agenda. This is about women's right to choose. They never, in their subtitle, put, what about the unborn child's rights? They never put that in. So here I am sitting listening, knowing that I'm being manipulated by CBS because they don't show the other side of the picture. They don't show it objectively. And it's always women's right to choose on the abortion issue. It's never about unborn children's rights. But anyway.
Well, because that child isn't a child.
Typical liberal press agenda. Go on, Jatovi. Go on, Jatovi. And I am supposed to be stupid enough to be.
So here's a question: are you eating chickens when you eat eggs?
What does that have to do with the?
It's because
you're being manipulated by your wonderful.
You're saying that a woman is an incubator, and that is all she is. When she's pregnant, her life means nothing. It's all about the unborn child.
Listen, there's two sides to the story, and they present.
Well, let's not get sidetracked, guys.
Okay, I did some research in the area, and most biologists, or people that actually study there, believe life actually starts in conception.
So do we celebrate the birth date or the conception?
Whole notion.
If you want to start over and do the show up on abortion?
No.
Let's get back
later. I'm just talking about media manipulation.
Yeah, your media manipulation was false. Your example was false. What was going on in Ohio?
No, it wasn't false. I was being manipulated.
No, you weren't.
No, not at all.
Because
no, you weren't, Nick. That's a political position that you're taking, and it's not fair, and it's not objective.
They didn't ever put up their unborn children.
You're being silly. What was the reason for the contest at all? Why were they voting on this to change their constitution? It was because they wanted to outlaw abortion. That was the reason they were doing this. They wanted to make it 60% instead of 50%. So that was the entire reason that people were voting. And the way you're manipulated the conversation is false. And it's just not right, Nick. Come on, state it as the fact. That what they were doing was trying to outlaw abortion. And they failed because the majority of people said, no, we want to be able to change our constitution to allow people choice. That was
Nick. What you're saying, Jim.
And Nick, just really quickly, just to get to your point about media and everything, because I was trying to remember. Hold on a second. Hey, Nick, hold on a second. I was trying to remember. There was actually, you said that they don't cover both sides, but there was actually a major Frontline documentary that was literally called The Abortion Divide. So they definitely covered the debate of abortion from both sides, and they actually went in that whole notion. And that's just one example that I could pull up and everything. So you can't say that the media doesn't address both sides of even the abortion debate, because that was a well-known PBS documentary that existed that literally was called The Abortion Divide. So it talked about the divide of the views and how it is both sides have their right to their opinion, and that was a PBS Frontline series that was out there. So, and there are a number of other ones that I could pull up as well, and that was not that long ago. It was 4 years ago. It was back in 2019.
But I think that's
thank you, Counselor, for what they call
and any Murdoch-owned news outlet is not going to be liberal.
Thank you,
And to amplify
evidence.
To amplify what James was just saying about what Jim was just saying about media manipulation, it's also due to the terms that we use. Because when you say the baby's rights, if we're going to actually be specific, it's called a fetus, and it's not actually a baby. So when we try and use the term baby, we're trying to manipulate people into our position. So that's media manipulation 101.
Jacoby, sorry, it's a fetus, soon to be a baby. That's how it's right.
Not all fetuses become babies. Not all babies are born. So
that's true. The biggest abortionist is God. God gets rid of a third of all babies, or before they can become babies, be a miscarriage.
That's good to know. But I just want to address the constitutional issue through my counselor, Jim Mead over there. Okay, so what you're saying, Jim, is that to pass a constitutional amendment, they wanted to maintain 50-50. There is no other law that ever anyone would consider other than abortion on this 50-50. Would that be correct, Counselor?
No, absolutely not.
Then I rest my case. There's other issues.
Actually, Nick,
now change their constitution. Their state. Hey, Nick, don't ask a question.
Nick,
talk over you. Hey, don't ask a question and talk over the answer.
Counselor,
calm down, Nick. Come on, let's go. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's not.
No. There's no further questions.
You asked a question. Let me answer it. For God's sakes, come on.
No further questions. I'm done.
You didn't let me answer.
No.
What kind of counselor are you?
You already answered. I don't need you to elaborate.
Did you stop beating your wife, Nick? No, don't answer. I've already decided you haven't. Come on.
Counselor, I'm done with my questions.
Nick, that's so bullshit.
You already answered it. I'm good.
What they were doing was voting on whether or not they can amend their state constitution. That was what they were voting on.
That's correct.
You changed everything in your dialogue.
That is correct.
In your setup, you changed everything.
So abortion
as secondary counsel
about whether or not they can, how many votes they needed to change the state constitution.
That was the issue.
And they were going to leave it the way it was, or as the Republicans wanted to do, elevate it to 60%. They were going to leave it as it was, Nick, or change it. And they decided to leave it as it was. Stop changing the argument from the reality.
But
as secondary counsel,
bad man.
As secondary counsel, you're ignoring context as well, because as secondary counsel, the Republican Party was already saying in Ohio that, the Democrat Party are trying to do exactly as you said, make abortion on this and abortion on that. So they were already putting it on the ballot because they're saying that the Democrat Party did not want this change because they want to put on the ballot this abortion issue. So they were actually trying to change it so they could throw in this abortion term so it would outlaw abortion in Ohio. So utilizing all the evidence.
Nick, you're practicing the manipulation you're complaining about. Now, to get back to manipulation of the media, what we do is practice confirmation bias. We always seek out what we already believe in. So we change the channel if we're saying something we don't want. So this idea that it's leftist or rightist, come on, Rupert Murdoch is a leftist? Come on. Many people are
Jim and Nick, really quickly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, since we're talking about the media show. There is a paper that I have heard people say is very liberal, and they will sometimes say it has some very liberal biases. I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but I have heard on the show people have said that the New York Times has a very liberal bias, but in last year, July of last year, they actually wrote an article called "The Pro-Life Generation: Young Women Fight Against Abortion Rights." So is that a liberal agenda if they are putting a different kind of case on a story and everything? Because like I said, I've heard people even on this network come say that the New York Times is surprisingly liberal and everything, but that title of that article and the nature of that article seems like it was definitely given a different viewpoint and all
Did
along.
anyone
those
else
lines.
grow up reading William Safire in the New York Times? William Safire was a brilliant conservative
Isn't
writer.
he dead?
He's dead now.
I'll
Yes.
just
So
say-
they have
Okay.
replaced him with another, Brett Stevens, who's also very, very good. I don't agree with him a lot, but he's very, very good. And he's constantly in the New York Times editorial page. I grew up, as I said, yes, he's dead now, reading William Safire. He was a brilliant conservative writer. So
I'll just say, to use your example, Mark, that the New York Times, if I'm understanding your question correctly, the New York Times is obviously not a liberal paper because they've written this one article. By that analogy, then Fox News is not a right-wing news outlet because they did a Pride Month story this year. I mean, that just nobody would accept that. But I just want to come back, if I can, to media manipulation and the abortion issue. One of the things that I've found trying to understand this is obviously the rest of the world hears about what happens in America. So it hasn't really been an issue here in Australia for a while. And I thought, well, yeah, I've got to re-examine my own beliefs. I'm not going to tell you what my beliefs are, but I'm going to have to re-examine my own beliefs and find out what the issues are. And the way that it's been framed by media, on the right is it's a baby and you're going to kill it. On the left, it's, women should have the right to healthcare decisions and autonomy over their own bodies. One of the things that I've found is, okay, if there doesn't seem to be much of an examination of what the proposed laws or proposed changes would actually be. So, for example, one of the more readily accepted by conservative viewpoints is that in the case of rape, that the fetus could be aborted. And I've sort of asked this question a few times. So how would you prove that? Would you require the mother to prove that she was raped? Would you prosecute a mother who wasn't adequately able to prove that she'd been violated? How would you enforce this sort of a rule? I think these sorts of conversations need to happen if you're going to actually have any kind of reform or any kind of sensible legislation. I think the reality is in the United States that you're not going to have the same conditions as Roe v. Wade across the whole country. That's clearly not going to happen. You're also not going to have, 6-week abortion bans across the whole country either. It's clearly going to be, well, unless the federal politicians get their way, but I think that'll be struck down by the Supreme Court and your 10th Amendment. So the question really has to be, who should be making these decisions? Should it be medical practitioners and families, or should it be politicians and legislative assemblies? And how exactly would these decisions work in reality? And one of the unfortunate things about politics is that they'll pass laws with really very little care or consideration for how it's supposed to actually operate. One of the other Republican talking points, they call these, late-term abortions, 5 seconds before the child is to be born. Well, okay, but what do you do if there's a medical emergency? What do you do if the umbilical cord is wrapped around the neck off the child and it's going to cause the mother to die and the child may already be dying? What exactly do you do? Do you require the doctors to go and get a letter from the lawyer to say that this was medically necessary?
Shaquille, those are great points. You're bringing up great points. But how did this show get hijacked to abortion?
What I'm saying, James, I don't know why. I just wanted to comment on the abortion issue because you guys are talking about. I don't know why media on both the left and the right aren't talking about these in medical terms and in depth. What they're talking about it only is about the right to choose or the right to life. And that seems to be those two catchphrases. And I think that's where the media manipulation sort of comes about.
But it's not just
To
there.
answer
It's
that
also,
question-
Jim, just really quickly, it's not just there, but it's also in the nature of the sensational and all along those lines. I mean, one of the most powerful advertisements that I have ever seen, and no matter where you stand on the issue, many people that watch the show know where my leanings are in the issue and all along those lines, but everything. But I would be lying if I said that seeing an advertisement, and there were advertisements literally in North Carolina of a scarred fetus and everything, that does not impact you if you're driving down the highways and everything. So that is part of what goes on, because that is technically not part of the media, even though I would argue it is part of the media, because it is an advertisement that a group put up there, and all along those lines, they bought the advertisement space, and you are impacting a lot of people that are driving down the road and everything. And that sign was up, Jatuffy, you can correct me if I'm wrong and everything, but I want to say it was up for a number of years, maybe even almost I want to say 5 to 6 years before they finally took it down. But no matter whether you are pro-choice or pro-life, it definitely impacted you seeing that kind of imagery on a major highway. I can only imagine what it was doing to the kids and all along those lines that didn't even have a thought yet in the whole debate and all along those lines. But that's a whole another conversation that goes on in this conversation. So it's also a matter of what we are defining as media as well.
Well, just to jump back to exactly what Shaq was talking about, the reason why these things and you know, that was already decided. All those things you were talking about was already decided. That's what Roe versus Wade was. That decision was already set in stone. The reason this abortion, and you can talk about even cigarettes, because it happened with cigarettes years ago. All these things become politically charged. When they become politically charged, we have to look at both sides. There are no both sides to allowing a woman to make her own decision about her health care and her family. No. There was nothing political about it until later, when people decided, hey, you know what? Wait a second. I'm going to put up this photo of this baby on the side of the street. All that stuff, that's just politically charged rhetoric. And there is no, again, there are particular things that we have to realize. There's no two sides to the story. When we're talking about bigotry, racism, rights for people, and things for, you know, all this stuff, there are no real two sides to the story, but we make it a false equivalency. So we can have the political mindset of this versus this, when we're not thinking about what is right for the communities, what is right for
people have differing opinions, Jatuffy.
Oh, Rick's got his hand up, Chat.
All right. So here's why abortion makes me sad. Been arguing about it for 2,000 years, still no consensus. Increasingly clear that climate change is happening at a rapid pace, but no consensus. And there's going to be all this new stuff because of tech coming down the pike. Like if you want to marry your robot girlfriend in 15 years, if some billionaire has 90% of his 100-year-old brain replaced with biocircuitry, is that still a person? All these issues will be handled incompetently because we can't even handle the old issues, much less the new issues. And like, especially with the right, people on the right get paid a ton of money to both sides stuff and to prevent consensus. Tucker Carlson makes $30 million a year. Sean Hannity, $30 million a year. Alex Jones has grossed $1 billion by spreading like dissension. One reason Trump was elected in 2016 is he got $5 billion worth of free media coverage because he said crazy crap.
Okay, and that sounds good. And because now we'll bring up the Donald. Isn't he getting more free coverage right now? The latest LinkedIn poll we did said 55 to 45% favor Trump to walk on all these charges. So isn't all this doing is giving Trump more media coverage so he gets elected?
Yes.
He's electable at this point unless you have a third-party candidate like RFK Jr. come in and steal a big chunk of the Democratic voters. But I mean, Trump is up on 78 charges, and it's going to be close to 100 later this week when the Georgia charges come in. It'll be impossible for him to, have a perfect record of getting off on every single charge, though he certainly will be able to push the verdicts, most of them well past the general election.
But see, Nick, you're smart. Oh, I apologize, Jim. Take it away. You had your hand up.
Thank you, Jutovi. We just got finished talking how polls, nobody responds to them now, and then we put up a poll that favors Trump, and come on. But the idea here is that yes, the media attention reinforces his base, and his base is clearly at least a third of the country, but not 40% of the country. So will he get elected as the Republican nominee? Maybe. Probably, but will he be electable to the rest of the country? I think hardly, and we'll see. But I think that his chances in a national election against any living, breathing body would be questionable because most of the country is against them. They caught on to the con artists.
No, well, just Jim, along the same lines, you say they call on to the con artists, but there is something that even Jacoby talks about, on this show and other shows, which is the social media influencers. And those social media influencers, there are some that are on the right, just like there are some that are on the left as well. As a matter of fact, I can point to a country in Latin America where apparently they are coming to the aid of the current leadership, and they're calling him the liberator of that space, that being El Salvador. So a lot of people are feeding their TikToks and a number of other social media outlets because apparently he's got an expanded network of social media personalities that are amplifying his leadership there in that country, and are even calling him the leader of the entire Latin American community and the future liberator of Latin America. So couldn't you see something similar happening with some of the TikTok influencers that are part of the Trump camp? Because there are some people that are young that are part of the Trump camp, and they know how to work the TikTok, they know how to work Twitch, they know how to work a number of these other things to get the young folks engaged in his base and all along those lines. So you're saying that
he's going to bust if we don't let him talk.
Yeah. So this is perfect because that way. So Nick was spot on about media influence, because this falls exactly into that media influence. Trump is about to be on his fourth indictment, and that might happen this week. The thing is, because of those indictments and the way that the media that is playing his indictments, he's for some of those independents is becoming a sympathetic figure because of the amount of time and free media coverage that he's having. So going into next year, he may be seen by those independents. There may be some sympathy for what he's gone through, even though he's broken the law repeatedly, lied repeatedly. His family, this is why I hate hearing the false equivalency of the two sides issue and the Hunter Biden is being treated so greatly. Well, Jared Kushner got $1 billion plus from the Saudis. And Ivanka, while sitting there in office, got 20 plus trademarks from China. Yet we don't talk about how criminal that was, and not to mention this whole fake stack of lost or these papers that Trump is now trying to step away from his businesses to run the country, and he's forcing world leaders to stay at the Trump Hotel so he can sit there and make extra money. Same thing with staying at Mar-a-Lago. All these crooked things that this man is doing, yet Hunter Biden gets this sweetheart deal. It's the whole false equivalency and the amount of time that he's on TV and these indictments and the way the media is playing it. Yes, he's going to be a sympathetic figure, and that's something that we really have to worry about, because depending on who the Democrats put up, it might not even matter, because people are falling in love with this sweetheart story that Trump is being attacked, because that's the way the media is playing.
Except that Trump is hurting his cause by going on Truth Social and just saying crazy, awful stuff. And Trump's net disapproval has been above 16% for almost 2 months, which is the highest it's been since 2017, and double what it was during the 2020 election.
But that's all baked into the cake because remember, the man was retweeting white supremacists, and people
But it
still
comes down to
voted
the
for
whole
him.
notion of the lesser of two evils, and that is what's happened in a lot of things and all along those lines.
Sure.
Hey, Sasha, I got a question to you, and it's actually coming back to what I raised earlier, which is about the social media, and it's actually a quote from somebody from the University of Toronto, Sevi Godnatsky, but he said, or they said that social media was once hailed as the ultimate democratic tool to organize protests, even revolutions across the world. And there's no doubt about that. Governments from Russia to Uganda are now using it to control the narrative. And what they said is they use this tool of liberation technology to actually prolong and strengthen their rule. Such governments use influencers because their content doesn't look so much as like propaganda, and it's more like shaping the narrative in a more subtle way. So I've definitely seen it happen all over the world. But do you think that these social media influencers could even influence, as I just alluded to earlier, even the election in the United States? So Sasha, you are one that definitely studies what's going on, not just here, but around the world, and definitely in Europe and Ukraine. But do you think that because I've even seen some of the social media influencers coming out of Ukraine that are shaping the nature of that war, and definitely there are some that are trying to counter the narrative from Russia. But what do you think the influence can be of our social media influencers to the point that they could influence something even here in the United States?
Russia is very much advanced in social media influencing, and for the first time it worked in the election of 2016. Without Russia's media influence, Trump would never, ever be even close to become a president. He would be rejected as a simply non-presidential material, if you will. However, he won. Although he lost popular vote, but he lost he won electoral college and so on. For Russia, social media influencing is more important than nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons, okay, yes, you have them, but you cannot use them. The only time you should have used them, and it's one US general mentioned, in the first 3 days of their attack on Ukraine, they had to use tactical nuclear weapons, and they would definitely own all Ukraine. They would get it. Okay, there would be for years probably some resistance, some partisan wars or so on, but they would win the war in 3 days. That's for sure. Now, Russians were scared or unsure of themselves, or they thought that they will win the war anyway, so they don't need to go to such drastic measures. So the Trump issue, I will tell you that not all Republicans are fools, surprisingly enough, but that's true. And even if he is the most popular of the nominants, the Republican convention will reject him as a Republican nominee. They're not fools. He has no chance.
I agree with Sasha that social media is the cheapest way to destabilize, for Russia to destabilize foreign governments. Russia spent about $300 million over the past decade on social media to destabilize and create dissension in foreign countries. That's 30 million bucks a year. That's nothing. They have a building in St. Petersburg that's just full of people generating BS to tweet out or put on Facebook that doesn't look like it comes from Russia, and it helps make people pissed at each other and crazy.
But
It's
Rick,
such
how do we deal with that? Because apparently that's part of the article that was talking about El Salvador. Because apparently El Salvador borrowed a page from the Russian playbook, and they literally have got a bunch of trolls. And I know that that's something we're concerned about even here on this network and everything, to create fake social media accounts, spread falsities, and harass critics. So how are you going to address that?
Surveillance.
You don't know where they are coming from.
You need surveillance by Twitter, by Facebook, by the other social media companies. And Twitter can't, well, it's not even called Twitter anymore. Now it's X. And Elon Musk fired all the people who were supposed to monitor for sneaky BS. So we're in this election coming up, there's going to be just an avalanche of BS again. And it's going to be, tough to squeeze out of the system.
And along those lines, and I know Jacoby's gonna love this, but apparently one of the TikTok videos coming back to that whole thing in El Salvador is going out there declaring that God chose Bukele to be president of El Salvador. And I know that there are probably some tweets out there that are similar that will claim that God is the reason that Trump should be the president or that Biden should be the president. So we're going to claim that we know what the Most High is wanting from our own political landscape. But apparently it got a lot of hits because it was over there on TikTok, and there were definitely a lot of folks that were loving this notion, just like I'm sure there will be folks that will love the notion of somebody coming out and swearing up and down that God declared Trump the winner even before the people have voted.
Argentina is about to elect a scary libertarian with really good hair.
Hey, this... Guys, I want to point out that Russia is an autocracy. We're talking about tyrants. Look at China. They control the social media. All the people that don't have other outlets to get their information, they hear the same thing. And this is what we're talking about. When you go autocratic and when you get tyranny in place, then you get a single message. And that message is heard by everybody, unless you have some backdoor channels, in which case you can be prosecuted and jailed. And these are the types of things that happen in these countries that we're speaking about. If you try to give another point of view, you can disappear. So these things are not here and everything. Just a moment. I haven't finished. And the point that Mark raised is, what are we going to do about it? Well, what we do is protect the freedom of the press, allow many voices out there, and we allow many voices. People will still look for their confirmation bias, and they'll still, but as I pointed out in the New York Times, for example, which is, when they say liberal, it's an anti-Semitic thing about the New York Times as well, because it's been owned by Jews. So, this has been going way back throughout its history. But they've always had a conservative, a well-spoken, well-thought-out conservative voice on their editorial page. So this is what we're looking for, something that has some balance. Right now, Bret Stephens took over for William Safire. So that makes sense, right? They tried William Christoff for a while, but he was a little bit too wacky. So they brought in somebody who was a little bit better, in my opinion, Bret Stephens. And, again, I don't agree with him a lot, but I read them. And so this is what we should do as citizens. Look at both sides of the stories that are arguments that are valid arguments, not whether or not they're racist. Those aren't two-way arguments. You can't do certain things and get away with it in the United States. And according to our Constitution, our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those are the things that we all are supposed to believe in. But, the fact is that there are many issues that are very difficult and they're very complicated, and they need to have all sorts of arguments voiced.
Hey, Jim, along those same lines, I'll come back to TikTok and everything. Along those same lines, how much do we care about, because I know we've talked about it on this show as well as other shows, what people are doing respectively in their own bedroom and everything? Because apparently Olivia Dunn is known as a great college athlete on social media, and her rise in fame has come with questions about her personal life, including who she's dating. So she is definitely involved in the sport of gymnastics and all along those lines. And she definitely came on recently and waved off everyone wondering about her relationship status with a TikTok back in April, saying she needed to focus on gymnastics rather than boys. But a slew of recent social media posts have fueled rumors she's dating a former LSU baseball head, a star who is turning heads in the minor league. So folks are trying to figure out who she's dating, why she's dating them, and all along those lines. And she's basically going like, look, I'm trying to concentrate on winning a championship, and all along those lines, y'all can decide that on your own. So how much do we need to even care what people are doing in their bedrooms? Because this is a fueling conversation that people will grab something and somebody dating and then want to make it a topic of the news and everything else for weeks, if not months. So how much do we really care? And is it something that we should care about? And why is it burning up the social media outlets? Any thoughts on this?
All this comes down to information inequality, which includes how resistant you are to distraction and BS. 20 years ago, if you were doing online poker and knew what you were doing, you could make a ton of money because there were so many pigeons waiting to get their. And Shaquille, I'm sure that there have been, you've had opportunities in the markets when a bunch of people who didn't know what they were doing piled in, and you could see that like something was puffed up or puffed down based on people not knowing, not understanding, and that issue of being fooled, of not being able to figure out what's real and what's not, turns big swaths of people into victims of people who do know what they're doing.
Let's let Shaq talk.
Well, I'll just say, look, I've never been involved in toxic flow trading, because I don't like it. I think that's it's the wrong thing to do by the market participants. But what we did see with the HFTs is them negotiate with the exchanges and change the rules, and other participants didn't know it because it was buried in the rule books. So yeah, you do have that information
Inequality
that you use. I just want to come back to Donald Trump though for a moment, because I think there's a tendency for people who don't like Donald Trump to underestimate why or misunderstand his appeal to people. If you look at the what he said with Charlotte about, there's good and bad on both sides, he really should have denounced that more, and he did really push the race button in the United States in a way that most people, I think, would suggest is inappropriate. But I don't think that that's the reason why the majority of people are voting for him. I think that when you look at those places, even if they have access to the same newspapers and the same news channels and things like that, a lot of them aren't watching. I was actually quite surprised the other day when I was actually looking at how many people were tuning in to the mainstream news stations, like Fox, for example. It's only a few million people in a population of 330 million. So how much influence do they really have? Well, maybe some of what they say, you get these little snippets that gets put on TikTok. But I think that most people, what's happening is a lot of people are saying, I don't understand what's happening. And when somebody starts speaking to me and they start using these terms, I'm just going to tune them out straight away. And I think they feel like they're a bit disconnected from their government. And so that's probably the reason why things aren't showing up in polls. Because I don't think people are doing what they did 10 years or even 20 years ago, where they would actually look at a candidate they like and vote for them. I think they're just either voting along party lines, which is a given that's going to happen every election, or they're voting for somebody that most closely resembles them in their mind. So Donald Trump's doing a pretty good job, in my opinion, of making himself out to be the victim with all of these charges. And look at Hunter Biden, he's getting this sweetheart deal, and there's all this corruption around Burisma. Now, that's not really true. Like, the firing of that prosecutor didn't actually help Burisma, but that's irrelevant. That's the viewpoint that people are going to have, and they're not going to look into it in any greater detail. So I don't know, how do you fix that? How do you fix when people aren't really reading newspapers anymore?
You don't have to worry about fixing anything, because everything what you described work for only 30% of American electors. 30% will be with Trump. He can start killing 5 people every day, sometimes even 7 or 10 and a half. It doesn't matter. They will be always with him. Okay, that's fine, but it's only 30%.
But the issue, Sasha, is how people are being influenced and where people are getting their information from. I personally have always been of the view that these so-called influencers who stick their butts out and take a photograph out the front of some shop aren't really driving sales for that shop. But it can go wrong, as you saw with Dylan Mulvaney. Now, I can tell you, Budweiser is not really that popular a beer in Australia. You'll occasionally see it. Bud Light doesn't even exist over here, or at least as far as I'm aware, and I used to own a pub. I've never seen a Bud Light can in Australia, right? But people in Australia started boycotting the thing. I was in Dubai recently. They're boycotting it. Why? Because in their terms, some boy who dresses like a girl, who's not really a girl but is trans, had his face on a can when it's really a boy. I mean, this is ridiculous. Yeah. But everyone's boycotted it. So these are the issues that are really resonating with people. Oh, we have to deal with this, we have to deal with that. And I can tell you, I've got a lot of right-wing friends, a lot of left-wing friends. And some of the things that they send me about what the Democrats are doing. The Democrats are going to sterilize your children. The Democrats are going to do this. The Democrats are going to destroy society. And the thing is that whilst that may not be true, most people I don't think are going to look into what's being proposed by regulations and legislation, and it's going to scare them. And I can tell you, I know people in America that will say to me, California wants to terminate your parental rights if you don't affirm your child's gender at the age of 7 and your child comes and tells you they're a cat. Now, that's not true. That's not quite what California is proposing. But most people aren't going to go and look up what the proposal is. Most people are just going to go, you know what, that's not the party for me. And that's what you're seeing, that it's these quick, bite-sized, 10-second snippets of information that's actually really having a huge effect on the psyche of the population, of your country and of mine.
Well,
Exactly right.
Just to touch on, you kind of answered your question on how much where people are getting their social media or where people are getting their influence from. Because yes, the newer generations are getting most of their influence or their information from online sources. And a lot of them are getting through the TikToks to the whatever social media you want to put out there. For example, when you talk about the Anheuser-Busch can or the Bud Light can, that really all the actual I got Peppa Pig playing in the background. Where all that meat and the outrage and everything else came from, that did not start on the news media. That started actually on a social media influencer, Kid Rock, who actually started pushing that information out along with other social media influencers. And that's really what caused the outrage, because people didn't even look up the fact that Kid Rock was actually at drag shows. So he's doing this whole media outrage. But as you said, Shaq, and it's spot on, is that people look at the headline. We have a bumper sticker mentality. We see the headline, we get mad, we go online and yell our point. And that is what Donald Trump is good at. Donald Trump is good at taking that headline and running with it. And claiming all this innocence. Yeah, the people that go to his rallies and anybody that you talk to that follow his social media stuff or follow any Fox, Newsmax, Tucker Carlson, whatever, if you have any discussions with them, they'll talk about, yes, oh, well, Hunter Biden got away with this because that whole duality and false equivalency. It's not equivalent.
Now you've got Trump saying, I'm one more indictment away from the presidency or something like
and
that.
He's using that for campaign purposes because he's found out that is that whole, hey, I can use this to get more followers, gain more people. And he was right that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people would still follow him. He would not lose a follower. It's because he understands that media mentality is a bubble.
You told me, how much did we play into that as the media as well? Because one of the things that I was curious about is we talk about Atlanta, we talk about DC, and
Mark,
one of the people that is getting very busy in that lane, they're bringing a lot of money to those respective cities, is the media. Because like I said, if the media doesn't cover it, then they are accused of not giving it enough attention. But then you have everybody and their mother down there in Atlanta covering the trials, because it's not just the mainstream media, but it's also a lot of those social media influencers that are down there as well. So I imagine that just about every media outlet, minus Pod TV, because I don't think we have an Atlanta correspondent as of yet.
Jim's turn to go.
Could change and everything.
I mean, it's how it's covered, but Jim, take it away.
Thank you.
Jim.
Thanks. You're quite right to point out that we're superficial in our politics, and we got to the point where we just basically said they're all the same, and it really it infected the voters to the point where well, Trump will shake it up. Let's just he'll shake it up, and it just will be different. And then we realized, to our horror, what it meant. To have somebody, he's an apprentice star. He's a reality TV guy. Of course he has appeal to these people. He had high ratings. Yes, he can play to the media.
He only got high ratings the first season. For the next 20 seasons of The Apprentice, he got sucky ratings.
Okay, I stand corrected. However, he still, that was his appeal. On the TV and an authority figure, you're fired. on the TV. He never fired anyone. He always sent someone else to fire people. Come on, the guy's a coward. He's six. How many deferments did he get? Come on.
I think the
Just a moment. I'm not done, because our founders relied on informed electorate, and we're not an informed electorate anymore. And what do we do about that? I think that's the thing. And the media plays a role in this, but we have all sorts of information out on the internet if we want to go find it. So some of this goes down to the voters. It's on us to do a better job. Research.
The problem with Apprentice, and this is related to politics, the problem with Apprentice in my eyes was it never really taught anybody how to run a business, which is kind of why you might have tuned in, right? Plus, he fired Meatloaf, and Meatloaf's my favorite singer, so that's enough for me. But
right off on a dashboard.
Let's go back to the political issue, though. I think Democrats have got to take some responsibility for the fact that they had a very negative campaign, the Democratic primaries with Hillary Clinton. And, it was all about why you shouldn't vote for her. She was the worst possible person. She did all these things wrong. And then she got the nomination. And then the Democrats were like, oh, no, you've got to vote for her. And then when she was doing a lot of her speeches, it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And so a lot of people were hearing about, race, gender, sexuality-based issues at a time when they felt out of touch with those sorts of things. And remember, the world's a changing place. This is one of the things the conservatives are really bad at. They're bad at keeping up with change. Someone who's a more classical liberal like me, I want to be involved in the next big idea. That's, if you're in business, you don't want to run an old, boring business like banking traditionally is. You want to run a hedge fund or private equity, go and do some fun things. So I think that world, there's a disconnect there. But to somebody who's a rural farmer or somebody who doesn't really care, maybe they haven't finished high school and got a diploma, they went to trade school, they've got a job, they don't care about these issues. And I think there was a disconnect with them not feeling like that, that Hillary Clinton would represent them. I think that's become even more exacerbated under Biden. And things like Dylan Mulvaney going to the White House, things like when Jen Psaki invited another TikTok influencer to the White House. I think there's a lot of people in rural America who just feel like that's a whole different world that they're not part of. Now, I've said this before. If I was American and Donald Trump became the president, I'd have to leave the country as soon as possible because my businesses would have, if I was American, suffered under him. But there are a lot of businesses that would have actually thrived under him. It just depends on what you're doing. Rick?
So I have a prediction. Biden has a 50-year political history, and he and Trump both have approval at 40%. Hillary had a 40-year political history, and it makes people hate him. It leaves them a record. Obama came out of nowhere. Trump politically came out of nowhere. You need somebody without a political history. You say 10 years, Taylor Swift Fox News is okay with Taylor Swift. Liberals are okay with Taylor Swift. If she decided to run in 2035, people would be okay with if The Rock, Dwayne Johnson ran. I think in the future you will be seeing celebrities, and Trump's evidence of that, you'll see celebrities run because they don't have a political history.
But that's a terrible idea, though, because I don't understand how politics works, how to pass regulations and laws and all of that. Jatavia, sorry.
Well, they have good advisors.
I was going to say, Rick, honestly, that is one of the big reasons why Trump beat Clinton was because he did not have that political history, and she had such a history that people hated. So that was working against her more so than even the Bernie Bros and so on and so forth. That's where the problem is. So, Rick, honestly, you're right. Idiocracy is a documentary because it's wild. And if you think about it, if we go to the doctor, we want an experienced doctor that knows how to do what they're doing. If we hire somebody to fix our car, we want an experienced mechanic to fix the car and do whatever. For a politician or a president, we're getting to a point where, okay, we want somebody who isn't in politics to run the government. That's crazy. That's why we have so many problems, because we get somebody who a Trump or even how some people want to point to RFK, but RFK really isn't anybody that anybody really wants. But we get somebody who's outside of politics that caters to a particular base and is only known by name, fame.
I'll give you an example, though, Jacoby. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is a great man. There's no question about it. And if anyone wants to argue about that, then you can do it with someone else. But he wasn't a very good president because he had no support around him. He was an outsider. He couldn't get anything done inside the establishment because he was outside.
And what's
He got
great,
made fun of. He got hemorrhoids. The press loved that. He got bitten by a swimming rabbit while he was on a boat. The press loved that.
and what's funny,
But,
I mean, even if
in
you take a
fairness,
look at what's going on,
Jimmy Carter, after what was a very difficult end to his presidency or a very difficult time as president,
Yes,
he really has dedicated his life. I would dare suggest more than any other living president.
I agree.
He's dedicated his life to the furthering of
Any
No doubt about that, and everything you see Nick's back and
But
everything.
if you look at
That is-
campaigns, if you come back and look at campaigns, look at the Obama Mitt Romney campaign. It's a very negative campaign. I was really unimpressed by that. Wasn't quite so negative with McCain, but it was just negative on both sides.
So-
I think this is the problem with Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Well, Carl
Was it-
Rove started
Trump-
that. Come on. That was
I have to disagree with you completely on the
Donald Trump
Obama
actually-
and McCain one. McCain literally had to stop somebody in his crowd because Sarah Palin had been pushing that Obama was a Muslim and is going to blow up the city, and he literally
Republicans
had to stop.
owned negative campaigning, man.
Yeah, Republicans
Republicans
negative
campaign.
campaign.
Come
That's
on.
what they campaign
If
off
I
of.
can finish my sentence. So Donald Trump in the 2016 election, he ran, whether you liked his vision or not, he ran, we're going to change this, this, and this. This is what we're going to do. Our politicians
Negative
do this, all that
campaign.
sort of stuff.
He
Whereas,
was retweeting white supremacists. It was a negative campaign, so we cannot play the line that it was. But finish your thought.
no,
Finish your
okay, Jacoby. Well, I won't say
No,
anything.
Shaquille,
Everyone
to finish
voted
your thought.
for him
Finish your
because he's a
thought.
white
Finish your thought.
supremacist.
Shaquille, finish the thought.
So in the campaign coming up, what I would be worried about is that you'd have a repeat of the 2020 election, where Joe Biden and Democrats are only going to talk about what Donald Trump has done wrong, rather than really articulating a vision for the future. And I'm not sure that the achievements that the Democrats have made in the last few years, by then 4 years, is particularly well known and well publicized. They haven't done a very good job of messaging on it. I mean, for example, the economy has increased, the GDP of the country has increased from 20 trillion to 27 trillion. I've not heard that on left or right wing media. So people just say, oh, the economy's doing well.
Unemployment.
It's
record
just
low.
not, his achievements aren't really being put out there, and I'm not sure what the vision's.
With that thought, the finished thought, we're also going to finish the show because we're at the hour. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to the media show around the country of the United States of America and around the world. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.